Hello, I'm Bradley Augustine, and this is Daniel Hollander with Hollander and Loan. We're here in our continuance of our series for residents that are entering practice, looking at some of the hot topics that we get a lot of questions about. The topic we're going to be discussing today is contract negotiation. But when we're talking about contract negotiation, I'd rather have you think of it as what to look for in your first job. This is a question that we get a lot of inquiries about. And the thing that we most often come back to is a lot of people will look at a contract or look at an offer, kind of skip through a bunch of pages, get to the final page or wherever it is where it's that compensation number, and they say, well, is that good or is that bad? And Dan and I have come to the conclusion that there's a lot more to it than that, as you might suspect. There's a lot of nuances throughout the contract that can make the experience wonderful, or it can really break the experience for you as well, leading to a lot of the burnout that we've seen. So Dan is an attorney, so between the two of us, we review a lot of contracts every year, and so we wanted to talk through some of the things that we see most often. First, let's talk about work-life balance, Dan, and talk about what work duties look like within a contract, vacation, those kinds of things.
Well, Brad, what I find is that many physicians coming out of their residencies and fellowships, you have this, pent-up desire to start their life, and that means that often they are starting families, they're purchasing new homes. Going into contract negotiation is something that should account for what you're looking for, aside from just the duties of your profession. So if you're a surgeon, you know that you have to perform surgery, you'll do clinic. And the question beyond that from a job duty is, what type of group are you negotiating with? What type of call schedule do you have? What type of support are you being provided? If you're in clinic, do you have a scribe or an MA or a PA supporting you? That's going to make a huge difference. Just an example with medical records documentation, really, most of our physicians say is adding 20% to their workload. They're bringing files home. You don't need to do that if you have a scribe. So is that something you want to have front and center in your discussions with a prospective group? So that's just one example.
Another example that I was thinking of when you were talking about that is just location. We had an orthopedic surgeon once that was finishing his residency out in Washington, D.C., and he was offered a continuance to work as an attending physician as part of that residency program in Washington, D.C. I believe the offer was about $450,000 to $500,000 per year to work with these residents in a clinical role. He was then offered $750,000 to move to kind of the middle of nowhere, Illinois. He was 4 hours from Chicago. He didn't really have a love of the city. It wasn't a thing for him. A lot of people would not be able to do that, and so that spread of income there is for good reason.
There's another thing that your point triggers a memory of a physician who was decidedly moving to a more rural area. The goal being joining a group that's not serving that, and the group was willing to pick him up as an associate physician. So the question going into a contract negotiation is, what is the intention of the group? What is their goal? And how do you serve that role? And if you have RVUs and other means of measuring whether you're going to be able to pick up and participate in the bonus compensation that many groups have beyond your base salary, do you have the ability to veto negotiate with a group if they suddenly want to add someone to that office? And the reason being, if your compensation is really dependent on being able to generate RVUs and you're building the base in that role, you may not want the group independent of you to add one or two new physicians, and then for the purpose of you building practice, make that more challenging and impact your referrals.
I agree. You use the term RVU, that's relative value unit. That's a unit that's assigned to each procedure that is accomplished within hospitals or practices. It's recognized by both the insurance companies as well as the people who are putting together the compensation practices. Broadly speaking, an RVU, the more work you do, the more RVUs you accumulate, and therefore the greater compensation you have.
Yeah.
One thing that Dan's talking about here is we had a GI doc that was in a very rural area, and he was compensated entirely on RVUs. The problem was he was the only GI doc for 4 counties around him.
Yeah.
And so you're not going to encourage more people to have gastrointestinal issues. There's as many as there are, and that's the full stop. So while initially his contract had looked really great, hey, you're going to be able to, the more business you drum up or whatever, in this case, you'll be able to make more. That wasn't possible for him. So he really had to do a straight line salary, or it didn't make sense for him.
Another thing that we often will want to have our clients explore is risk management issues. The obvious ones that are what kind of malpractice insurance is carried for the group. Is it sufficient? Do they have tail coverage so that if you left a group, that you are protected from prior cases that, sometimes litigation takes place years after you've left the group that the incident may have occurred in. So the tail coverage will protect you in that way.
And if I may interrupt, one way to avoid the need for tail coverage is when you're initially getting your coverage, there's 2 different types of malpractice coverage. There's what's called claims-made coverage, and there's occurrence-based coverage. Claims-made coverage means it's when the claim is made that you need to have the current coverage in force. So in Dan's example here, you leave the practice, a few years later somebody says, hey, you messed up when you were back here, and we're making the claim now. Well, if you don't have the tail coverage Dan was talking about, you're not covered for that procedure. The difference is, and that's for a claims-made policy, the difference is for an occurrence policy. An occurrence policy is when the incident occurred. So it could be 20 years down the road, somebody says there's an issue that time period, that occurrence policy will still have you covered. Sorry to interrupt you there.
Yeah, and another topic that is going to be important to you in reviewing if it's a meaningful contract is what type of fringe benefits are provided by the group. So health insurance would be an example. Do they have disability insurance? When you have disability insurance, do they have both group and individual? What is the taxability? So that's going to be important. If you file a disability claim, are you receiving tax-free dollars or taxable dollars? That really depends how the group structures the disability plan. And you've done a lot of work with residents and fellows, and certainly that's important from the standpoint of while you may not be in the position to start actually negotiating a contract, you're looking forward a year. Can you transition your disability insurance, or should you get individual insurance that is offered for many fellows and residents, even without income, to carry on and guarantee future insurability?
The portability of those policies is really important, and portability actually leads me to possibly the area of the contract that we spend the most time on, and that's the non-compete clause. We all hope that our first job out of training is going to last for decades to come, but that is very uncommon, and so more often than not, you will be changing offices, practices multiple times throughout your career. So non-compete, non-solicitation is a really important aspect of the contract. I would say it's possibly the most important from a liability and
next to compensation.
Next to compensation, good point. Yeah, that's a good point. So can you talk a little bit about non-competes versus non-solicitations? A lot of questions about how enforceable those are.
Well, the first thing to know about the non-competes is that the enforceability of the non-competes depends on how the contract reads. If it's considered too onerous, a judge will throw it out, and part of that reason is that if a group says, well, you can't leave the group and practice within 250 miles of the office, well, that means that a family has to move, and if they say, and the non-compete's good for 48 months, well, that can be considered too extensive. So often you want to examine. We always encourage, whether it's us or your own attorney, have your contract reviewed. Every group is going to provide you a draft contract, and if they don't, you should ask for it. Say, I want to be able to review this with my attorney and have a open, kind of transparent discussion. There should be absolutely no reason that they can't provide that to you, and it should be just demand is not the work on me, but your expectation should be this is an open relationship and you're working towards agreement. And if right at the beginning of your relationship you find that something's sketchy here, they don't want to have me have that roots, that's something to think about.
It's something we call the smell test, and if you are trying to push for disclosure of something or more information about something or some form of documentation and they're really holding back, that's a bad sign. And it's pretty hard to have that reconciled at any point in the future. So don't walk away from that, run, as they say.
So the other thing I know that it comes to us all the time is looking at what other programs that are in place that will benefit the physician. So do you have a 403B if you're in a hospital? Do you have a 401k? Do you have a profit sharing plan? The goal is to be able to optimize that which you can defer taxation on. And it could also be a deferred compensation plan itself. In a hospital setting, it's considered, the federal code is 457. But our goal is to help our clients see that if you are, as most physicians ultimately are, reaching the highest tax brackets, what other means of mitigating taxation are there? And qualified plans, your retirement plans, your 401ks, your profit sharing plan, those are important. And if it's a real small practice, even having a defined benefit as opposed to defined contribution, where you can have an actuary come in, you can stuff a lot of money away, and that should be something to note. Is your group thinking along those lines? Because if they're not, if they don't consider having these retirement plans in place, that's going to be problematic for you as well long term, because you're going to want to take advantage of all the years of training and try and minimize your taxation and optimize how much you can accumulate.
I agree. I know we've carried on for almost 13 minutes here, so I guess my final thought, I have a final thought, and that's this can be a really intimidating process for anyone. People who are changing jobs that have been working for 20 years are intimidated by the contract negotiation process. We would encourage you, however, to go into it boldly, realizing that people are interested in hiring you. And furthermore, that you have more authority with this than you think, and you furthermore have more authority to negotiate than either of us would have when it comes to this. If we give you ideas of what you should counter with, you yourself need to go and counter with those ideas. Having us do it for you is something that's not unheard of, but it's not the best way to get it done. Anything else?
I just say that I think Brad is exactly right. And the better informed and the better prepared you go in discussions, really you're going to command greater respect from your professional colleagues. So I totally agree, and good luck with your contract negotiations.
Yeah, thanks for watching.
Thanks.